Rolling. Episode 69 of the Rant. Good morning. So here we go. Let's get into one of my favorite subjects, which is Tombstone, Arizona. So check it out. Tombstone, Arizona was founded in 1877, and they dubbed it the town too tough to die, because buildings they'd be lit on fire, and it would just go right up. They would just erect these stores, gambling halls, saloons. There was over 100 saloons, 14 gambling halls, and Tombstone had the first real red light district ever recorded, at least. See, everything is just ever recorded. So you could always, anytime you talk any sort of history, you got to go as you've read about it. As you've read about it, you take the tours. I like to make my trips down to Tombstone. So, but this is as we read about it, and we'll just take it as fact. It's okay. So the first red light district in the American Southwest, and they even had a livery stable, which was the OK Corral, which is famous for the gunfight, which technically didn't happen at the OK Corral. It happened right around the corner, but didn't have a cool name, I guess. So it just kind of got deemed the OK Corral for that big gunfight there with Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday and Virgil. And Morgan Earp was there. The Old West will always be remembered as the era of the cowboy. Tombstone was controlled by so check this out. Here's what I want to get into. Here's what I really want to get into is China Mary. Now, if you guys aren't familiar with China Mary was the real gangster, was the real money maker, the real capitalist of Tombstone. And it's a major immigrant success story. So they called her China Mary. Now, the reason why she was called China Mary, and of course she just went with it, it's all good, because immigrants, when they were illegal immigrants, they were just given a name by Americans. So women were mostly named Mary, and the men were named John. They just gave them that name. Probably a few reasons. They couldn't pronounce their Chinese name, which China Mary's real name was Ah Chum, Ahchum. But she was born in China in 1839. Now, she arrived in Tombstone, what they think is around 1879. And at the time, the Chinese population in Tombstone when she arrived was only 11 people. They had 11 Chinese in Tombstone. Now, Tombstone's a small town, so I guess there wasn't a lot of people in Tombstone. But within 18 months, they grew up to 250 Chinese people. And Mary was drawn to Tombstone because she had drive. She wanted to be a businesswoman. She wanted to be a success story. And she was. So she recognized the profits that were waiting for her in Tombstone, in boom towns. So there were other boom towns. But this one specifically, Tombstone, now they called it a boom town because it was a booming. It was busy. Gambling, prostitution, saloons, drinking, gunfights. It was booming. So Tombstone was one of the most prolific of the boom towns. So due to the unprecedented silver production, the town of Tombstone grew in population from 100 to 14,000. That's a lot in that little town. If you've ever been to Tombstone, Arizona, that's a lot. That's a lot of people back then. And by the mid-1880s, it was larger than San Francisco and was the fastest growing in between St. Louis and San Francisco. So according to, now this is a note according to Josephine Marcus, who Wyatt Earp later on married and spent his life with. She had a funny phrase about the town of Tombstone. And she said that Tombstone had a man for breakfast every morning, which means somebody died. Somebody always died in Tombstone. And despite its tough reputation, Tombstone was the most cultivating city in the west of the Mississippi, and China Mary was the most powerful person in it. So we know about Wyatt Earp, we know about Doc Holliday, we know about Johnny Ringo and the Cowboys and the gang, the Cowboys, Curly Bill Brocious. But the most powerful person was China Mary. And here's why. Because she pulled all the strings. Now, they also called some of these towns hop towns because people, they'd hop in and they'd hop out. They'd get in, make their money, and get out. So this is where all the Chinese lived. The Chinese would move to these hop towns and try to make a living. And the Chinese were workers. So guess who ran the workers? China Mary. And so she took up one whole square block on one end of town. And she took care of all the alleys, the tunnels. So anytime work needed to be done, you went to China Mary. Now, it was so named that appeared that the townspeople now let me skip. That's not important. So China Mary, who was usually adorned, she wore fine silk. She wore fine silk robes. She wore a ton of jewelry, and she owned and operated a general store, and it was located right in the center of this hop town. And Mary's store dealt in both American and Chinese merchandise. She was smart, because obviously she's going to cater to the Chinese. But she knew that the money was to be made with everybody that can come through. So she quickly gained reputation as a universal accommodator. Everyone knew that Tombstone, everyone knew that nothing happened without China Mary's say-so. Nothing. And she was held in high esteem throughout Tombstone. So she organized, she was a shrewd business operator, shrewd. And she had the attitude and discourse that was they could say was bad for business, but not for her, because she had a private police force. That's a fact. So the sheriffs, everybody protected China Mary, which means if there was any problem, say from the round eye, which is what she called them, which is what all Chinese people called the anybody who wasn't Chinese was round eye. So if there was any problem, sheriffs and her crew would be smashing these people. That is a fact. So China Mary was gangster of all gangster. There was no going back on China Mary because she had a crew. And how she built that crew out of coming over from China is beyond me. I mean, that is some great resolve. I mean, the way you can cultivate this business as a woman, as an Asian immigrant, is amazing to me, and very inspirational, actually. So Mary enjoyed the highest level of respect, and as a result, she could act as sort of like a intermediary between Asian community and other ethnic groups. Now, in addition to dealing in customer goods of the day, and Mary also controlled several industries that were commonplace, if not essential. So to a town on the frontier, like for example, Mary was a prolific moneylender. She was a loan shark, basically, where she had her own methods of both approving customers and collecting delinquent debts. She also controlled the laundry business. So it looks like Asians are still controlling the laundry business. But Mary had a virtual monopoly on laundry, which big business guys, especially in that dirty, filthy fucking town. So, I mean, it was a desert town, and she did the laundry. Brilliant. Supply and demand. So she brokered the employment for nearly every Chinese worker in Tombstone, personally guaranteeing their honesty and quality of work. So if any of the Chinese did not do top-notch work, she'd smack the shit out of them. Not only would she, but her goons would also do the same. So work got done, and that money always flowed through her. So how workers got paid was through her. So anybody, railroads, anything like that, she got paid and then paid them. So she has a quote. Now, her English, what's interesting is her English was good, but not the best, right? So she would say, them steal, me pay. She would say that, which basically, if I'm the way I hear it is, if my guys are stealing from you, I'll pay you out. So either way, you're fine. But she will always get that money, and she will always slap the shit out of her guys if they did not do their work. So as far as payment was concerned, it was always made to China Mary and never to the employee. The capacity lay somewhere between like a local politician and a translator. So, she had to have a translator, but she worked with all the politicians. And however, when Mary saw opportunity, like any good businesswoman, she exploited everything. Just like the laundry. Exploited it. Y'all are dirty. You're dirty. So you got to pay me to wash your shit. Brilliant. It's a good idea. So the vice trade was a big business in Tombstone, and China Mary was its biggest provider, in addition to running a gambling hall behind her general store. So she ran all of it: saloons, gambling halls, brothels. She also ran an opium dens. Now, I wish there were still opium dens. How fun would that be? But she ran all the opium dens and Chinese prostitution. So, and Mary did not discriminate. She recognized the benefit of catering to markets of all nationalities. So it wasn't just to Chinese, it was everybody. She also ensured that the terms of every business deal or vice arrangement would be performed to her stipulation. So she made all the terms. Tombstone may have had its share of violent killers, but nobody was feared more than the Hop Town's finest, which is China Mary. And she had law and order, and she had loyal enforcers. That's a fact. And so some would say Tombstone was the kingdom of China Mary. So again, we're really into Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday over there and the Cowboys, the Cowboys. China Mary was the real gangster. The Cowboys did nothing without going through China Mary. So Mary was a hard woman, and she had to be. So in that time, she demanded respect. But that is not to suggest that she was without compassion. She was also known to help a person in need. If you came to Mary's door, she wouldn't turn you away, because there were no hospitals in these hop towns. It was just you got sick, that was it. You got an infection, that was it. So her charity was not limited to Chinese. It was limited to everyone. And on one particular occasion, they claim, is on record, there was a cowboy named Andy Darnell that suffered a badly broken leg by falling off his horse, which probably happened a lot. Tombstone did not have a hospital, like I said. So Darnell had to heal at a local boarding house operated by a woman named Mary Tack. Now, I don't know if Mary was her real name and Tack was a real name, because they would just give people names that had no family or were immigrants. So China Mary insisted on paying for all the costs that associated with this Cowboys recovery. She didn't even know this guy. And she would do that a lot. She would just, because she had all the money. When you're talking Tombstone, you're talking well-to-do people, as they call it, Tony-looking people. It's a very Tony-looking town. Not like Anthony Tony, but Tony like a tone. There was a tone to be had, which was clean and busy. A lot of things to do. So she was notorious for just helping people. And she had a lot of empathy. So she was gangster, but she had a lot of empathy if you needed help. There was no... See, the Cowboys as gangsters would just run through, rape, pillage, that sort of thing, steal. She was posted up. She posted up in Tombstone, and that was her business, was Tombstone, right? That area. Now, again, if you've ever been to Tombstone, it's small. But back then, I don't, things weren't as small because you were walking everywhere, you were taking your horse everywhere. And obviously, there were no cars, there were carriages. But so they called Tombstone one of my favorite places to visit in America here. The town too tough to die. And it says that. So when you go in to visit Tombstone, it says that when you're coming in, right there off of Allen Street. There's a banner that flies over Allen Street, and it's called A Town Too Tough to Die, because it survived infancy, because the diverse community was able to coexist. So it was allowed to thrive during collaboration of its citizens. So China Mary was the conduit that made everything possible, that made capitalism possible. So she provided necessary services to this frontier society and supplied the means of vices. So what I mean by, I've said vice a few times in this little rant here. The vice means pretty much everything. You're gambling, you're drinking, your opium dens, your prostitution. So we're calling that a vice. Who knows what they called that back in the day here in 1877. Who knows what they called that? But the vice demanded by many of its people. So she was not only a cunning businesswoman, but a sympathetic humanitarian and a very, very calculated capitalist, a very calculated gangster. And she was an immigrant. I mean, this is it's much like how the Italians took over when they moved over into America. They took over the East Coast. It's very similar. They got in and got to work, and as an immigrant, you had to make means where you can, which supply and demand. What does that mean? What is supply and demand? Well, you need some prostitution. People want it. So why not open it up? You need opium. Why not go get that, China Mary? You got the means. So she got it. Why not handle all, gambling? Why not get into that gambling? Because people were gambling. And they were gold mining, silver mining. It was booming. And the reason why Tombstone was a boom town is because it was very close to the silver rush. Very close. You didn't have to travel far outside of Tombstone to go get your silver. Plus, cattle. Cattle was a big pay. So there are a lot of cattle drivers, and that's where the gang, the Cowboys, got their name. So Mary was a genuine immigrant success story. And as a woman in the Old West, she had real power. So that's interesting, isn't it? Because in history, we look back at the women in history, which a lot of women's jobs, the only thing they could really do to make their own kind of money was prostitution. And that's where people's wives came from. A lot of women were prostitutes. So whether you think that was that was an honorable job, or they did what they had to do, or they enjoyed it, or it was great money, because China Mary, in theory, is what her quote unquote prostitutes in her brothel. Everybody was treated well because nobody wanted to fuck with China Mary. Nobody. So, and you can actually go see. So they have this Boot Hill graveyard, and you can see all the cool tombstones that they had out there, and the tombstones were made of wood, and they were engraved in the wood, burnt in the wood. And so there's over 1,000 people that's buried at Boot Hill Graveyard in Tombstone. It's definitely a tourist attraction now, and you can check it out. You can see what they've read about it. So getting back to old Mary here, okay, real quick. They named Boot Hill Graveyard because you died with your boots on. That was what you did as a cowboy. That was what you did back then. You died with your boots on. So, and there's a part in the movie in Tombstone where Doc Holliday's dying, and he looks down and his boots are off. He's in the I guess some sort of hospital, wherever that was located. I need to check that out. And that's where Wyatt Earp comes in and says his goodbyes, says, thank you for being my friend. And he looks down at his feet and he goes, oh, isn't that interesting? Or no, that's not what he says. He says, isn't that funny? And the reason why he's looking at his bare feet isn't that funny because, well, especially a man like Doc Holliday, you died with your boots on. You died in a gunfight. You died out there cattle raising, cattle hustling. You died out there hustling. So that's why he did that. But yeah, Boot Hill Graveyard was the graveyard to go to, you know. So, and her grave is right on the top. It's right on the top of the tourist attraction. And it says, I pulled up a picture here. It says, Miss Alum, quote, in quotes, China Mary, born China, died in Tombstone, December 6, 1906. So she was 67 when she died. Now, not bad, guys. Not bad. What did she die of? What did China Mary die of? She came from the Far East, obviously. And her popularity, they say, still grows, but nobody knows about China Mary. If I talk to anybody that loves the history of the Old West, Tombstone, Arizona, they've never heard of China Mary, which is weird. And they've tried to bring her in. So they released something called The Life and Legend of Wyatt Earp, and it's awful. It's really terrible. And they had this actress play China Mary, and she's terrible. so don't even try to watch it. It'll anger you. But maybe it sucks because now you're comparing everything to Tombstone, the movie Tombstone, and nothing compares. And the movie Tombstone was so great because they tried to be as authentic as possible. They shot it in Tombstone, Arizona. They used real guns from historians. They used real clothing. They also had Wyatt Earp's son on set. So very cool, right? And so they got a lot of good information, and they really cared when they were making Tombstone. Now, a little fun fact, because Wyatt Earp, the movie Wyatt Earp, came out around about the same time, actually the same time. So Kevin Costner was the producer on that, one of the producers. Kevin Costner, as savage of an actor as he is, he wanted to put the kibosh on Tombstone, the movie, because it was a threat to his movie's release. So what he did is he bought up all the costumes in Hollywood that would go with the West, the Old West. He bought up all the costumes. And that's how Tombstone ended up going, okay, we got to go authentic then. We can't go into the costume department because we got none. So really, Kevin Costner made it easier, or made it harder on the directors, producers, makeup people, everything. He just made it harder because he bought up all the wardrobe. But so it actually helped, though. It made the movie better. It made Tombstone better, and the movie Wyatt Earp is garbage. It sucks. I mean, the acting, in my opinion, the acting is terrible. And maybe because I'm comparing it to Val Kilmer's Doc Holliday, Kurt Russell's Wyatt Earp, Bill Paxton's Morgan Earp, Virgil Earp, What's that guy's name? What's that guy's name? I get compared to his voice sometimes. Boy, I can't believe Sam Elliott. That's him. I can't believe I forgot his name. Sam Elliott. But anyways, it was fantastic movie. The movie Tombstone was fantastic. But in this episode, China Mary, guys, very, very interesting how this little Asian woman who died at 67, was it 67 or 68? See that? I already forgot. 67. She ran everything with an iron fist, and she was loaded. She had all the money. So when it came time, when the big gambling hall that Wyatt Earp and the Earps eventually ran with gambling, was called the Oriental. And the Oriental, guess who was running that? China Mary. You better believe it. So money went through China Mary. We hear about Wyatt Earp running shit, and Wyatt Earp was only in Tombstone for 2 years. He came in looking for a better life for his family, and he already made a life and a name for himself for being an officer. So now that he arrives in Tombstone, all this happens in a short period of 2 years between him and the gang, the Cowboys, and that fight at around the corner, realistically, from the OK Corral. Very interesting, guys. So what I'm going to do is we're taking a little trip up to Tombstone, and I'm going to be taking some video. I'm going to be podcasting. I'm going to take some video, and I'm going to be a little tour guide over there. Not for you, for me, because I love it. I love talking about this shit. Because every time I read about it, every time I learn, because I forget a lot of these things sometimes, but I learn a lot of different things, and I start putting things together. For example, this was not written. I have not read this piece here where Wyatt Earp was running when he went in there and took over the Oriental to run to buck the tigers over there. So he was running gambling, and the place was called the Oriental. Now, I just put it together that China Mary was running because she ran all gambling, most of it anyway. So a place called the Oriental, you think China Mary be running that shit, wouldn't you? Anyways, guys, China Mary, check her out. It's very, very interesting. So I love doing these little Tombstone rants. So I'll keep them going. I hope you guys like it. I'm out of here. Cheers.